Hello and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcast. Our guest this week is award-winning journalist, broadcaster, filmmaker, Lesley Riddoch.
It's always nice, isn't it, when someone contacts you and says, can I come on the podcast to talk about my latest project? That's great. We love that. And when that person is Lesley Riddoch, you go, yes, please. Lesley's got a new project ongoing. She's fundraising for it. It's going to be another film in the series of her films about Nordic countries. This one will be about Finland.
Probably everybody watching this will have seen the Denmark film along with another 1.7 million people. So these are excellent films that she produces. So it's really interesting, though, to chat to her about all the work that goes into creating it, because Lesley isn't a sort of film studio. She's a one-woman force of nature, and she just makes these things happen. Yeah. So we were delighted to help, and as always, fascinated to hear what's going on, and managed to get a few other topics as well into the conversation. With no further ado, here is Lesley Riddoch, award-winning journalist, author, filmmaker, and Lesley is going to tell us about her latest venture, which we're very interested in.
Well, thanks for the chance to do that, gals. It's basically a film about Finland, which is kind of going to be part of the group of films that are online at the moment, the most recent of which was Denmark, which amazingly to me has had its 1.7 million views. Admittedly, there's a friend who's able to look at the analytics of that. Half of the viewers are from the States. So I think there's actually a fair appetite because those countries have their diaspora. They had their clearances through poverty, starvation, everything. In the case of Estonia as well, occupation. So there's a lot of their citizens in the States who are kind of curious about the homeland, probably don't see many documentaries in English, actually, so they don't speak Danish, Finnish, whatever. So I think that's probably some of it. But I think the larger part of it actually is that, especially with the world the way it is at the moment, with a kind of Trumpian stamp on everything and a kind of might is right approach, all of this, tolerating vast inequality. We're about to spend billions on arms, which will just fuel an arms race that will again accentuate poverty across the world. All of that stuff, people are desperate to see more about societies that prosper doing exactly the opposite. So Denmark, I think that's why it came in strongly. But actually, even though we called Denmark The State of Happiness is the title of the film, Denmark is pipped regularly to the post, really, by Finland, which for 7 years running has been the happiest country in the world. Now, if you've known Finns or been to Finland, there's not a lot of belly laughing going on. They are quite a sort of, I find, pleasingly doer kind of people.
Yeah. I was in Helsinki 2 years ago. They're so lovely. They're so helpful. And the guy said, "Oh, by the way, this is me looking happy." And he was just, his face was sort of the same.
There's another classic trope about the Finns, which is, if you have somebody standing kind of on the other side of the room, this is us standing side by side. There's a lot of fun poked of the Finns for these reasons. Yeah. And you could go into quite, why they've had a terrible history. I mean, this is the other thing, terrible. They were part of they were an archduchy for a long time, but part of the Russian Empire for a very long time. Before that, they'd been owned by Sweden. So they basically just swapped owners sometime around 1819 or whatever. And they've just lived kind of just managing to keep their culture alive, mostly because their language is utterly unintelligible to anybody on either side. It's spoken, Finnish is it's a Finno-Ugric language. So it's spoken by the Estonians, the Hungarians, and kind of that's it. So the Swedes didn't speak the same language even whilst they were the colonial rulers. So they've had all that period kind of under the cosh, if you like, and just managing to keep going with, a bit like the Estonians actually, with a language as a powerhouse for sort of cultural survival. When they became independent after the Russian Revolution, when Lenin had said that all these satellite states should be able to go their own way, they immediately fell into the same kind of civil war that basically hit the Soviet Union, reds versus whites, if you like, the communists versus the rest. The rest won in Finland, broadly speaking, but it did mean there was an actual bloodbath in Finland, which has left quite a scar even 100 years later, when they celebrated their centenary relatively recently, there was a lot of people arguing there should be no celebrations because there was such a really horrible civil war in the aftermath of independence. So then they got through that and then hit the Second World War when the Red Army invaded Finland. And the Finns, at that point, this is when they showed some quite unbelievable sisu, that's a Finnish word that Churchill coined, to basically join the army. At one point, half the population of Finland was in the army and managed to repel the Red Army. Apparently, they're the only country in history that has managed to repel the Red Army. People may be familiar with the Winter War of 1941. I mean, obviously, the Russians regrouped, came back, and did actually manage to occupy much of Finland. They lost in the end. They actually joined with Hitler, which is where Churchill suddenly, whoops, no can do. That was obviously a bridge too far, letting Nazi troops cross Finland for the siege of Leningrad.
Didn't know that.
And then that's why by the end of it, they had to pay reparations to the Russians. They lost the state of Karelia, which is the bit nearest to Finland. And you would have thought that's them knocked for six now. But they sort of regrouped an awful lot because they had to pay, they had no cash. So they had to pay off the reparations to the Russians in goods, much of which was cables, mobile telephony. You might see what's coming here. And that sort of perfected Nokia. Nokia was the company that cables and mobile telephony for the army. So they kind of managed to build an industrial base by the reparations they had to pay by the Russians, and kind of began to get a lot stronger. The other big thing for them was land reform. Well, it wasn't land reform because land reform only happens in countries that have allowed feudalism to take a grip. So most other countries have never done land reform. They've just kept land owned by the people who live there. Funny old concept that, But so the Finns basically most Finns own land. And in Finland, land is a forest. Finland is a massive, massive forest. So what happened there was that as the newspaper industry began to gather steam in Europe, the Finns began to be the biggest suppliers of the wood pulp that turned into newspaper print. And that industry really powered Finland. And the key point is that it then gave income equally to everyone, instead of, if it had happened in Scotland, the Duke of Buccleuch would have done nicely, Duke of Roxburgh would have done nicely, but actually everybody, all boats rose a little bit, and that's one of the key kind of successes for the Finns as well.
That's fantastic. That's just amazing. I mean, I knew the bit about it is one big forest. I've got some Finnish friends, but I didn't know that bit about the land ownership. Although, as you say, that's the norm. We're not the norm, but that's fantastic. That's just fascinating, isn't it? When one thing like that makes such a difference to the overall financial state of affairs of a small country. Well, I'm saying a small country. Shouldn't do that. It's average size, isn't it? It's the same as us.
It's the same population as us, but it's much bigger than us.
Bigger, yeah.
A third of it's in the Arctic. But I mean, this is where you have to get your head around this, because it isn't a sort of small policy difference. That norm, ownership of land makes or breaks countries. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest things that's keeping Scotland down is both the absence of that and the perception that it's only a small detail. Yeah. I mean, is an underlying pivotal thing. So anyway, for example, I cycled around the Åland Islands, which are little islands between Finland and Sweden. And it also gives you a wee idea of the Finnish sort of outlook. I mean, they're very relaxed people and sort of tolerant of difference, because the Åland Islands, upon independence for Finland, because they were halfway between, and a lot of them spoke Swedish, they immediately said, we want to join Sweden. So the Finns put the idea up to the League of Nations that was active at the time. And in 1921, the League of Nations decided that the Åland Islands should remain with Finland, but Finland should pay for the inhabitants to learn Swedish, and that it should be a demilitarized zone, and it should be a bit like Guernsey, Jersey. They could make bucks out of having a kind of tax-free area. So that created a lot of trade for the Åland Islands and some prosperity, and it was actually a pretty good solution. But again, it's kind of interesting how they approach problem solving, which is very much not whacking people out of the head with stuff.
Yeah.
And there again, there's a land thing. They have a rule that you have to live in the Åland Islands for 5 years before you can buy land beside the water.
We were talking about that just the other day, about given our current housing crisis and things, people coming up from down south to retire, whether they should be some kind of, you have to live here for a year before you can buy a second home, or a home, in fact. I don't know that would solve the problem, but it's interesting that this is something that does happen.
You need a whole battery of stuff to sort of tackle that. Because, the Norwegians have a system where you have to have been on the electoral roll locally to buy first home locally. And these are people, these are countries that are protected a bit by the fact that so many tens of thousands of people own land. So, they've already got something going for them in that there's that diversity of land ownership in there anyway. Whereas we've got nothing going for us because we have, don't know what Andy's latest figures are, but it's no better than 432 individuals have the land. So we've got a big problem and we have no rules. This is the Wild West. So it's always good to be somewhere else that ain't.
So I was reading an article just the other day, and it was about the Nordic countries that recently, I think, end of May, and they'd all got together for a conference about just looking at how they needed to respond to what you might call, well, it's maybe not a new world order, but the instability. And of course, Greenland had been asked to it, Faroes were asked to it, Iceland was there, and there was this other entity there, which I was pronouncing to myself Åland, but obviously that's the Åland Islands. So they were there along with other kind of Nordic countries. So I hadn't realised that they had a semi or quasi kind of independence set up.
Well, they are quite self-governing, but that's in the same way as the Faroes are extremely self-governing and still part of Denmark. Yeah. And I should say that actually there's a tremendous conference coming up I'm going to this weekend. It's starting next week in Stornoway, which is that grouping again, all the small, all the Arctic, North Atlantic nations gathering in Stornoway. And well done to John Randall from the Scottish Book Trust, who really lobbied to get that meeting of the North Atlantic folk in Stornoway. That's the first time it's ever been held in Scotland. So at least, the Western Isles is joining that loop.
Oh, isn't that fab? That's sort of pulling us into that world rather than being dragged down south. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was really fascinated by about Finland is that how they went from having the worst men's health in Europe to practically the best in only a couple of years. And it was the way they went about it, and actually they had what I would call a grassroots kind of campaign. There were terribly high numbers of smokers. They ate what would not be regarded as a very healthy diet. They drank huge amounts. And instead of telling the men they had to stop doing all this, they educated the women.
I'm going to have go in and brush up on that one because the film is mostly at the moment looking at education, which we'll come on to in a minute. Yeah. But then it's sort of linked actually, because the Finnish education system is regularly the best in the world and is very much based on, there's no external exams in schools before the age of 15. So there's not a wee test at the age of 5 as we're doing at the moment, even for basic stuff. The view is children go into a school, the teachers are capable of running it, you let them get on with it, which is one thing. There's lots of small schools, which apparently helps boys particularly. Of course, boys always think they're, the big macho laddies that can cope with big, massive schools. Actually, they're the ones who just, completely curl up in big schools. So small schools are kept. Obviously, the Finns, like everybody else, do kindergarten till 6 or 7. So again, it really helps put a proper base in for education. So kids are not in school before they've learned to kind of control their motor functions, which our kids don't. So there's a whole load of stuff there. One of the experts on education, Pasi Salberg, who's written a best-selling book, we're interviewing him, called Finnish Lessons, which is pretty much the seen across the world as the sort of template book for how to make these sorts of changes. He's now got a job in Melbourne, and I thought, oh no, he was a Nordic Horizons speaker about 10 years ago, but he's coming back to Finland when we happen to be there filming, which is
fantastic.
But many phrases he's got, but one is particularly about the English system, but still about the Scots, that we are testing children to destruction. So that gives you a bit of a lie of the land for that. As regards the health thing, I did go over, I've been to Finland about 7, maybe longer times now. You're prompting the memory of another earlier trip, and was curious about this because there was this thing called the Karelia Project. Karelia borders Russia, and Finland is basically on the west of Finland. It's very tall, slim, fit Swedish people, blonde Swedish people. On the east, it's more sort of squat, not so blonde Russian people, Slavs.
Yeah, I noticed that.
The physical makeup changes as you move west or east. And I can remember speaking to this expert about it who came from Karelia and did somewhat conform to the, physical type. And he said, our big thing in Karelia, my mother's family, was eating pork. So that was the only thing that people would eat, didn't take seriously, was pork. He said, I remember once we had some chickens. One of them looked a bit wobbly, and my mother just wrung its neck and threw it on the rubbish heap. She said, you wouldn't even eat chicken. It was all about pork and salt. So you've got the beginnings there of a very bad dietary habit.
Yeah.
Okay, education definitely waltzed in there. But the guy I was speaking to, who was the head of statistics for their statistics agency, said, I know everybody likes this idea. The Karelia Project was also encouraging people to go and pick berries, which was to sort of supplement and change the diet and get the Finns, like all the Nordics, are massive berry eaters and pickers and so on. He said, I know everybody loves that side of it, that berries basically help the Finns kick their habits. He said, really what happened was, as we got wealthier, all boats rose. And as we educated more, all boats rose.
So going back to education for a minute, I know that the Finnish system comes, at the top for so often. We think our education system's pretty damn good. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And Scotland does come fairly high in those kind of tables, doesn't it? So are you going to be doing a bit of a comparison, or?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you saw the Denmark film, but the Denmark film had a lot about education in it. And so, okay, we may think that we do cooperation because we say the word cooperation a lot. They do it by sending their children to a school with other 15-year-olds for a year to learn to take care of one another.
Yeah,
so
it was fabulous.
There's talking the talk and walking the walk. And to be frank, we don't walk the walk. You could argue, okay, with independence, there would be enough money to kind of make schemes like that possible. However, you can only do what you can imagine. And it strikes me, you can only imagine what you can see. And because you see British systems, you can't imagine that this would actually make such a difference. It falls into the small, interesting deviation category. Whereas for countries that are successful, this is the big baseline for them. We're not really doing that well. So, for example, another characteristic of the Finns, which might be surprising, is that their teachers spend the least time with children in the classroom of any country in the world. So, that's a completely different take, because there's a very flexible school curriculum. Everything is about the kids learning at their own rate. A lot is about the collegiate nature of teaching, the teachers speaking to one another to get stuff that's going to be really top banana and really interesting. So that's a huge emphasis on it. A lot of the time there isn't homework. So a lot of the stuff that we think is absolutely pivotal, and there's not exams all the time. It's a bit like, suddenly in my mind, I'm thinking about someone walking across a tightrope and they finally just let go of everything and trust their own balance. It feels a bit like the Finns have got to the point where they trust that. And actually their levels of trust are pretty huge. Whereas we're still, let's just test them a wee bit. Let's just put them in little serried ranks. Let's just give them a little exam. Let's just kind of overlook the teacher's shoulders.
If you listen to FMQs and things, you would think that every school in Scotland is just gang warfare all day. And you've got that massive Tory lobby, crack down on it and make sure there's consequences. Well, what is the true extent of this issue, but what's causing it, and how could you prevent that, rather than how do you then let it happen and then punish them? And while we've got that mentality, and you can see it in lots of other fields as well, also, the Tories would like us to hang the criminals in the street rather than give them an ankle tag. So I'm exaggerating a little, but it's that sort of attitude, which is very strict, paternal and controlling, that to me is just the opposite of what comes across in equal countries, where they learn to trust and they learn to be self-sufficient, do things for themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting what you were saying about, you can only imagine what you can see. And I mean, I was watching, I was on the BBC yesterday, and it was a bit about education. It wasn't particularly about Scotland. So the image that they put up while the presenter was opening the slot, the image was big hall, full of serried ranks of a little table and a chair, all lined up. And I looked at it and I thought, oh God, remember that main hall at Perth Academy when you went in to do an exam for something. And I mean, that's just interesting, isn't it? Because that's the image that someone chose to put up on a bit of a news item about education. It wasn't even particularly about exams. So that's just intrigued me, actually, about, maybe what can you imagine, and the kind of images that actually we're used to. That's a pretty horrible one when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it strikes me, I mean, it's kind of even deeper than that, I think, because, I mean, this is a deeply unequal country, Britain. It always has been in almost every respect, but certainly economically, democratically, you name it. There has always been a sort of underclass, if you like, that has got no chance of social mobility, pretty much, that is living in essentially ghettos of kind of pretty crap social housing. And the system at the moment needs to kind of contain the anger you would feel, I think, if you understood that no matter what you do in life, you will get nowhere. Just to throw into it, you are physically contained, because you're not going to get out of there in the way that all these countries tend to have family huts that they disappear off to at the weekend. Even the poor people. And relatively speaking, there are fewer poor people because there's far more income equality. So you kind of again, we're just sitting looking at the symptoms that arise from a deeply unequal sort of society and thinking, let's take that symptom and worry about it and try and whack it back into its cage. And we will keep doing that until you start to see that actually, behavior and outlook in society just arises from a feeling of hope and therefore some trust in the chance of improvement and so on. And at the moment, I mean, I was just looking at this because I'm doing question time tonight and looking at statistics that suggest that the rise in deaths of despair, which is suicide, drugs and booze, has risen 24% since COVID. So
really?
It's already high. So it's important to kind of create something that resembles a hope in society. And that really is predicated on having something, running through all your policies that just puts equality first.
Do you think it's as bad as that in Scotland? Because, I hear you saying in a situation where there's no hope of getting out. So I go, well, I didn't ever think that. And I also go, yeah, that was the 1950s. I was born in 1950. So we're talking about 1950s, 1960s. Maybe there was more optimism. It was different. But I don't have that in my kind of experience. So when I hear it, I kind of go, surely it's not as bad as that. Or now a bit of me goes, well, is it as bad as that in Scotland? I could imagine some places in England that, I know might be like that. But it just, is it as bad as that? Do we need to be as pessimistic as that?
It's not about pessimism. I mean, it's just, I think, just about realism. Easterhouse, for example, is, I think, the 12th largest town in Scotland, if you looked at its population, without practically any facilities. And, we have corralled people by income into some of the larger estates around Glasgow. and then just kind of, lock the door. That's it. You might get can't remember what the bus is out to Easterhouse is at the 44, but that's, I exaggerate for effect because there has been something put in. But I mean, really, we have got massive poverty here. And that's why the Scottish Child Payment is impactful, because there's a big problem to tackle. Scotland is no more equal than England.
Okay.
Well, the 10 worst places in the UK are in England. So we might be no more equal than England, but we're not as bad.
This doesn't help, because the point is you've got to acknowledge, that we are sitting. This is, I think, one of the big impediments to independence, because people feel that a lot of folk who are supporters of independence don't appreciate that we have got a large chunk of the population who are totally disengaged now from an awful lot of stuff and are poor. And there's a fear that we'll be carrying a group of people who are hopeless. This is really just being honest about this. The longer everybody pretends that's not even there and hasn't got strategies to cope with it and doesn't understand how other countries have managed to shift some of the same problems, I think the more worrying it is for people who think that we that support independence are kind of airy-fairy do-gooders who fundamentally don't see the downsides of a society. And there are big downsides in Scotland. There just are. That's, to me, why I want independence. If we were doing hunky-dory, if everything was fine, then why bother upsetting the apple cart? It's because the British system, which Scotland emulates and seeks only to do 1 or 2% better than, crushes people. So I want to be independent to get a leaf out of their book.
Let's say we get the magic independence. What is the first thing we do to tackle that kind of Easterhouse? What do we do? Because wait for land reform is going to take an awful long time. What can we learn from these other examples of other countries that's going to give us a roadmap? Because I think if you want to have some hope, it helps to see a route out of that. So if we took the worst place in Scotland, immediately puts me in mind of if we took the worst place in Scotland and said, right, what would make a difference to this place? What can we dream about that we can learn from these other countries?
Well, you might have been about to say you're thinking of the Carbuncle Awards that used to come to the worst place in Scotland. And actually one place that got one of those awards back in 2003 maybe was Lochgelly in Fife. And that did act as quite a spur to people there. Although there was still, there was stuff already happening there behind the scenes, but still there's a lot of effort put into community buyouts, creating small little kind of units for people to start small businesses, affordable housing, which wasn't being built. This all sounds small beer, and it's like, no, I just want a big thing. I just want a Kinlochleven smelter. I want a Lochaber pulp mill. I want something big. But by and large, it's the small things that can then throw up something a bit larger. Maybe, maybe not. So, I mean, really, some of the first things that would happen, like, for example, if you take Easterhouse, it's on quite high land. If they did indeed own neighbouring land, well, first of all, I would be creating a council of Easterhouse. I would be equalising income at the back of it, as all these countries do, so that they're not just reliant on their own income. But then if I was Easterhouse Council, I would look at a compulsory purchase of neighbouring land to set up a wind farm to create income for the Easterhouse Council. And in fact, possibly just take the energy straight from the wind farm to fire a whole new system of district heating in Easterhouse, which practically removes fuel bills.
Yeah, and then you could also use it to charge up a fleet of free electric buses, and then you've got that problem solved. If there's only one bus to go to Easterhouse, it joins them up with the rest of the world.
There's also then the point of you can start to offer cheaper energy prices to businesses there, because you're not cooking on gas, but you're cooking on renewables, which you own. And so when you own the land and own the kit, and you need some power politically to do that, and you need some investment to be able to get the kit, you've started to get the regular income that every small place around Europe, and certainly around all the Nordics, takes as granted. Yeah. So that, I mean, the big revolution in Norway wasn't oil, it was hydro. And hydro dams were owned by the local councils in the state. Yeah. So, everybody's looking for big bangs, and generally speaking, it's proper systems and proper democratic control. And I feel like you're sick of hearing me say this, but yet it's true that Scotland has got the largest so-called local councils in the world, bar North Korea. Now, that does not harness any kind of, the local energy. It doesn't make communities feel like communities, and it just scunners an awful lot of people. That's probably change one or two. The other one would be kindergarten until the age of 6 or 7. So you start immediately to get the next generation on a different vibe with much more money put into that.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be an interesting thing to do as part of the journey towards independence, to do a sort of Easter House project, something that just makes it real for people rather than some very abstract concept.
I mean, I bet if we went over to Easter House, we could find small groups that are doing things. Yeah. I mean, you certainly could, and if you went to the other big one, other side, the Glasgow Drum Chapel, there are local communities, there are folk that are just, they're just ordinary people. They're getting together to help each other. I'm not disagreeing with what your argument at all, Lesley. I mean, I completely agree with it. I just think maybe there's more happening in these places than is normally seen.
Of course there is. I mean, where's this book here? I mean, I've got a whole chapter in here.
That's right.
In every community trust in Scotland. Can't find it quickly enough. And there is, of course, there's Easter House, Drum Chapel, Castlemilk. All of them are in there. That's not the point. All these local, I was a trustee of the Isle of Egg Trust for 8 years. I'm a huge supporter of community effort. But what's happening in Scotland is the little folk are kind of carrying the planet against structures.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is you change the structure so that in addition to all the Chavanoa at a local level, you're able to channel some of that energy into what other countries call councils. So that you have representative democracy that can then go and own things.
That's a big thing as well. I mean, we keep selling off the family silver, don't we? And I was just thinking about that whole discussion about the glens that are now full of planning applications for a wind turbine here, a battery storage unit there, and they're all being dealt with separately. So the combined effect is not necessarily being seen or taken into account. And when I was listening to that, it might even have been on your podcast, I can't recall where I heard it.
It was me that wrote the column last week. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, so there you go. It's some of it sticks. But that, I thought, this is another clearance. Somebody's house had been compulsory purchased so that there could be a pylon or a cable or something. Here we've gone from not owning the land so they could chuck us off and put sheep on, and now we're not owning the land so they can chuck us off and put pylons up so they can put energy down to the south of England. Because we own nothing, we control nothing.
Yeah, well, I did write that piece that's about the Highland Glens because so many people have got in touch with me. And the trouble with all of this is it begins to turn people against green energy, against Euro, and all of that is kind of pretty important. If we had an independent Scotland and the money coming from the wind farms could be taxed and the income would come to Scotland and would find its way back in the form of cheaper energy for people with pylons everywhere, that would be one thing, but it's not. So actually the people who are sitting with, there's one glen in particular, Strathdearn, I think, which is 22 miles long and has got apparently enough approved wind farms and ones already there to power 70% of the households of Scotland. The other point is that Scotland at the moment has got 113% renewable energy. So we're already producing more electricity, renewables, than our electricity demand. So that is where obviously the rest is for export. Now, you could also, if you're an independent country, think, okay, that's worth it because we're going to make a few bob out of that. In the same way that Norway has oil, vastly surplus to its needs because it doesn't use any, it uses hydro energy, so it doesn't use its oil. But it has traditionally sold it through pipelines to suckers like us.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So if in a different world, you might be saying to the folk in the Highlands, right, you guys have got the best wind take, the further north, generally speaking, or the most exposed areas. There's an argument for having wind farms, but in any other country, you would then factor in that the local councils would have a say composed of what people think. So, for example, in Norway, the councils in the Lofoten Islands just banned more drilling in the seas beside them. And that was it. There was no higher authority from the Norwegian government coming in and going, oh, but we need the income, and what about the future and everything? Lofoten just went, nah, and that's it. So in Highland, which is the largest council in the world, and which is almost the same size as the country of Belgium. You've only got community councils that are able to say something, and 53 of them gathered last Saturday to say they want a pause so that a strategy can be created. At the moment, I would have to say the Scottish government is not covered in glory on this one, because it's basically saying the system is working okay and we're taking things one step at a time. And, locals are saying, but that's creating this welter, because you might approach one wind farm, but there's actually going to be a substation there, another wind farm there. And what's it for? Because final kicker, right now, there is a kind of constraint on the grid as it crosses the border to Carlisle, which means it's hard currently for any new forms of energy to make it across the border. So you'd have to ask, what is the strategy for this? And I quite appreciate it's the UK government controls energy, and SSE is the company, clues in the name, Scottish and Southern Electricity, which governs the infrastructure developments and applies for planning permission and is in charge of all the pylons that are marching across Scotland at the moment to pony the energy to the new subsea connector that will go from Peterhead to Yorkshire. Right, so those are all Westminster functions, but the Scottish government could be cute with its planning permission consent bitty and start to really get some bangs for bucks out of this, and also do what the Highlanders are requesting, and that is to create a larger strategy so that people understand why they're getting what they're getting.
Okay, we've kind of gone a lot away from Finland, although it's actually fascinating. It's really great talking to them. I mean, I suspect that, if there was a Finn kind of in the back of the system here listening to us, they'd be going, "You lot are daft. Come on, you need to get yourselves independent as soon as possible." And Finland, I suppose it's one that you haven't done. Are you also thinking about how it might play into this year that we're in, running up to another Holyrood election, which, from the sounds of it, could be another key one, in terms of getting an independence MSBs?
Yes, but just perhaps in the kind of indirect way that I think when people see in detail how a functioning society operates and the kind of thinking that goes into it and so on, I think they can look at it. That's what seems to have happened with the Denmark film, and think we could do that. We actually have that outlook already. We just haven't got the governance structures, and we haven't translated that general outlook into the way we run our politics. But it also, to my mind, raises ambition. So the idea that you're only going to get a percentage point better than England at stuff does not fuel support for independence. It's not enough.
Yeah.
We are awash with resources. People need to understand why it hasn't turned into very much for us. And hopefully, you can bang on about it in Scotland, but hopefully sometimes looking at a country which doesn't have the same constraints on it and has chosen to use its resources differently, gives you more of a kind of bounce in your step. And I've got to say, having shown the Denmark film 43 times last year, through every named blinking storm there was, I would have to say, I would be amazed at the end of it, because I would have thought seeing a society that had got so many things just effortlessly looking right would be incredibly depressing to people. And it was really strange, because on every occasion, bar none, people were sort of skipping out the door saying, I feel really inspired now. And I think, well, funny, there you go. Hopefully Finland will do the same in a slightly different, these are all, there's some of the same lessons every time. And that people, I've been lucky in life to spend a lot of time going around the Nordic countries. And that's what made me realize so strongly that they're not strange, we're strange, So watching films like this, where if you've seen the earlier ones, Norway, Iceland, Faroes, and Estonia, which are all on the website, Have a Shifty, and indeed Denmark, you maybe begin to have some of the same experience I've had over more than, almost 2 decades. Mm-hmm. This is what we at this latitude could do. Yeah. So once that film comes out, if people want to show it locally as they've done things before, I'm quite happy to fire away on buses, trains and cars or whatever to.
Seeing the first one, the Norway film, I've been to Norway every year since then because of that film. So it does have impact.
Again, there's one of me. So that's where it's so useful to me to have young folk who are basically, I'm trying to grandmother a bit now, to have younger folk. Katie Kilgour, a lovely young woman and a mum of 3 boys under the age of 9, who basically made the little film about Applecross with me. She's going to be making more films in Scotland with me. And Gavin Hannigan, who is a young, we're calling him the lad. He is to us, but he's a young man who is a Scot working in Helsinki. And so that helps on the cost front, actually, because, he's already there. That's a great thing as well, because it'll be different. I want these guys to get in front of the screen as well, because there's going to, I'm not here forever. So there's got to be a point where you start to shift the load. And the skills that the younger folk have in terms of film and editing is amazing. In every respect, we need to be bringing young people in beside us.
Absolutely. You're setting up a fundraiser to help with producing the cost of the Finland enterprise. Do you want to say a bit about that now?
Yes, sure. It's actually already up, and it's got about 3,000 quid in it, which is fantastic. Great. So thank you, everybody. We've also just got some money from the Scottish Independence Foundation. So I think we'll be able to do this. My key thing is that Gavin gets paid, and that the filmmakers and the editors get paid, because that's the thing that takes longest, and they're young. So, that's the main thing. You can cut costs around that. But the extra money will go to making a film about what we've just mentioned, which is the Highlands Full of Pylons. And again, that's to make sure that Katie gets paid. So a lot of this is to make sure, okay, there's travel, I can't fly to Finland myself. So there's some costs you just can't kind of get round. But it would be great to manage to get that film, I think it's 5,000 we're looking for. We're almost there. That will help us really work. No, it's 8,000 because there's that extra money for Scottish films. So anything extra we make goes into Scottish films.
Well, we'll put the link in the notes to the podcast, and we'll share it on our socials as well. So fabulous to talk to you.
Yeah, that's great. Actually.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Cheerio.
So wasn't that a fascinating conversation with Lesley? I always come out of those conversations just amazed at how much ground we've covered and how knowledgeable she is about so many things.
Yeah, and the thing that has stuck in my mind, from that conversation was, when she made the point that Finland is a big forest. All Finns own a bit of that. It's not owned by a small number of people. It's owned by the Finland population. So when they, at a certain stage in their development as an independent nation, they started exporting a lot of wood, the whole population benefited because the whole population owns the land. And what a difference that is in Scotland. If that had been happening with our land ownership pattern, 450 Finns would have benefited from that, not 5 million. That just really stuck in my mind, actually. And
it's us that's out of whack with everywhere else. It's not them.
Exactly. And feudal is the word to use for it. It's a feudal setup. So the fundraiser, it's on the go just now. If you've got, a spare £5 or a £10 and you'd like to help Lesley get this going, she's got other projects in her mind as well. Give her a bit of help. Okay.
Yes, so the link's below. Also, we'll link to her website if you want to catch up on any of the films, and we'll also link to the previous podcast episode we did with Lesley on Denmark. So
Denmark,
there you go. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.